Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to be honest with you right out of the gate here. Today's stack of source material feels a little, well, it feels
Oh,
heavy.
yeah, it definitely has that vibe.
Yeah.
That sort of, for your eyes only kind of weight to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because we are working off what looks like a leaked or at least a very highly restricted market intelligence report. It's from Manal P's Market Intelligence. And normally, when we do these deep dives, we're pulling from the Times or the Journal, maybe a well-researched Substack, but this is different. This is raw signal processing.
Right. It's multi-INT strategy. That's what we call it in the intelligence community.
Mhm.
It's this intense blend of forensic accounting, deep scientific literature review, geopolitical risk assessment, all smashed together. It's absolutely not designed to tell you what happened yesterday.
Mm.
It's designed to tell you exactly what the person sitting across from you at the poker table is holding in their hand right now.
And the hand they're holding is rarely the one they are showing the public. Which really brings us to the core theme for today. The triangulated reality. Because as I was going through these pages, and there are a lot of pages in this report, I kept noticing this pattern. Every major story we think we understand right now, from the war in the Middle East to the layoffs at your favorite tech company, they all have this mainstream narrative.
The surface story.
Right, the surface story, the one my mom knows, the one scrolling on the news ticker at the gym.
And then there is the reality.
Exactly. But it's not just, quote unquote, the truth. It's a reality that you can only really see if you triangulate 3 or 4 totally disconnected data points. And often that reality is the complete opposite of the headline.
Which is the entire goal of a document like this. It's about stripping away what they call the fear premium, cutting through all that corporate PR spin, which, let's face it, is thicker than ever right now, and finding the alpha, the actual edge.
So to find that edge, we have a massive roadmap today. We're going to start with a geopolitical head fake involving Iran that honestly completely defies standard economic logic.
Yeah, that one's fascinating.
Then we're going to look at the energy grid, where the future is supposedly green, but the reality on the ground is remarkably steady. We are also going to get into the AI efficiency lie that's getting thousands of people fired, a literal candy war involving Mr. Beast, and some deep science that might actually completely change how we treat cancer.
I know it sounds like a totally random grab bag of topics, but I promise you, as we get into this, you'll start to see the connective tissue. It is all about the hidden mechanics.
So let's just jump right in.
Okay.
Segment 1, the geopolitical head fake. We really have to talk about oil.
We do. We have to start there.
So just for context for you listening, we recently had this joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. Now, traditionally, if you look at the last 50 years of history, if you tell me the U.S. attacks Iran, I'm going to tell you gas prices just doubled.
That is the absolute reflex. And honestly, if you look at the mainstream narrative right now, that is exactly what everyone says is happening. I mean, crude futures jumped over 10% almost immediately.
Right.
You have these analysts on the financial networks talking about the Strait of Hormuz getting shut down. They are aggressively pricing in a massive fear premium. The whole narrative is basically, this is the big one, buy oil, buy gold, build a bunker.
But then I look at the Mehta report, and in big, bold letters under the triangulated reality section, it just says, more bark than bite. And the actual trading recommendation is to short Brent crude futures if they go above $85 a barrel. Which, I mean, that feels insanely risky to me. You're betting against panic during an active war.
It feels risky if you only look at the explosions. It makes perfect sense if you actually look at the incentives. The report specifically points out what it calls a suspicious lack of alternative signal.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It means the narrative is just too uniform. Everyone is shouting panic at the exact same time. And in intelligence gathering, when a signal is that clean and unanimous, it's usually artificial. But more importantly, you have to look at the political calendar. We are heading into the midterms.
Okay, right.
The current administration, and look, this isn't a partisan statement. It is just raw political calculus. They cannot survive oil at over $100 a barrel. It creates massive inflation, it absolutely kills consumer sentiment, and it loses elections. So the triangulated reality here is that, yes, the war is real, the kinetic strikes are happening, but the economic consequences are being heavily engineered.
Engineered how, though?
Yeah.
How do you engineer global oil markets during a conflict?
The report predicts a very heavy-handed use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They're going to flood the market with barrels to counteract any supply shock. Plus, you have to factor in intense back-channel diplomacy. Basically telling the Iranians, look, we had to hit you, you have to hit us back to save face, but let's keep the oil infrastructure completely out of it.
So it's basically a choreographed dance.
It's what the market calls the pain trade. The market is long on oil right now because they expect a wider war. The trade that causes the absolute most pain to the most speculators is a rapid price collapse. The report is betting that the administration forces that collapse to save their poll numbers.
That is incredibly cynical but fascinating. So the fear premium that everyone is paying is actually a sucker's premium.
In this specific case, yes. The report literally calls it fading the panic. You wait for the spike, and you bet against it.
Wow. Okay, so we have the government manipulating oil prices to keep the lights on and the voters happy. But speaking of keeping the lights on, let's pivot to the power grid, because this might be the most ironic part of the entire stack today. We are constantly told the future is AI and the future is green energy. Those are basically the two main pillars of the 2026 economy, right?
That's certainly what the corporate brochures say.
But the report talks about a zombie energy infrastructure emerging, and it points to a massive resurgence of all things coal.
Yeah. This is the energy paradox. And to really understand it, you have to understand the underlying physics of AI.
I mean, we all know AI uses data, but I think we forget it uses electricity.
It uses an obscene amount of electricity, and it's not just more power, it's nonlinear demand. A single search using ChatGPT uses something like 10 to 20 times the power of a standard Google search. Now take that and multiply it by autonomous agents, video generation, AI coding. The demand curve isn't just going up, it is going completely vertical.
And our grid, what does the grid look like?
Our grid is flat. It was built for a world of very predictable, very slow growth. We're basically trying to plug a Ferrari engine into a lawnmower chassis. We are hitting a hard physical wall where we simply cannot generate enough actual electrons to feed these massive data centers.
So where do the zombies come in?
The zombie plants are these aging, incredibly dirty, coal-fired power stations that were fully scheduled to be demolished. They are old, and they are fully depreciated, meaning they've been paid off for decades. So utilities, places like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, they're looking at the math and saying, well, we can't exactly permit and build a new nuclear plant in 2 years, but we can just not turn off the coal plant.
So they're literally unretiring coal plants.
They're completely reversing the closures. And here is the real twist in the narrative. The Trump administration is relaxing emission standards, right? And the mainstream news frames this as, oh, Trump loves coal, or it's Republicans versus the environment. But the Mehta report says that is just the political cover. The real driver behind keeping these plants open is big tech.
Wait, big tech? You mean the same companies that have net zero by 2030 proudly displayed in their email signatures?
The exact same ones. They are absolutely desperate for baseload power, power that runs 24/7, not just when the wind blows. They don't care where it comes from anymore. They just need the server racks to stay on. So you had this very silent, very weird alignment where tech giants are quietly cheering for coal to stay online because the alternative is that their multi-billion-dollar AI products just stop working.
That is wild. It's like a necromancer strategy. Just keep raising the dead power plants.
And from an investment standpoint, it represents a huge, albeit dirty, opportunity. The report says, look, don't invest in new coal. Building new plants is still completely dead, but you should invest in the companies that are holding these old depreciated assets. They're about to become massive cash cows for the next 2 to 5 years. It's supposed to be a bridge fuel to the nuclear era, but right now that bridge is made entirely of coal.
So we have physical constraints on the grid, essentially forcing us back to 19th century tech. Now let's look at how those kinds of constraints play out inside the companies themselves. Segment 2. The corporate AI efficiency lie.
Oh, this is one of my favorite sections of the whole report because it confirms something a lot of us in the industry have suspected for a while.
Because the narrative is everywhere right now. You have Jack Dorsey at Block, which used to be Square, cutting something like 40% of his staff. Amazon is shedding entire layers of middle management. And the reason they all give, the buzzword, is AI efficiency. Dorsey actually said, and I am quoting from the report here, a significantly smaller team using the tools we're building can do more. And he predicts most companies will do the same within a year.
I mean, it sounds great to investors, doesn't it? It sounds like they're embracing the future.
It sounds like productivity nirvana. But the report very bluntly calls it a corporate head fake. Why is it a fake?
Because when you dig into the actual operational metrics, the productivity just isn't there yet. The report argues that this bloodbath has almost nothing to do with AI. It's actually all about interest rates.
The ZRP era cleanup, zero interest rate policy.
Exactly. For a decade, money was basically free. Companies hired thousands and thousands of people they didn't really need because, well, why not? Growth at all costs. But now, money is expensive. They need to fire those people to protect their margins. But you can't just go to your shareholders and say, hey, we overhired and we messed up our forecasting. You say, we are pivoting to AI.
It's a much better story for Wall Street.
It brilliantly turns a massive failure of management into a visionary, forward-looking strategy. But the Meta report has recovered intel from inside Amazon, actual internal engineer reports, and they are painting a drastically different picture of what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, they kept using the term technical debt.
They did, and they specifically noted a huge rise in SEV2 incidents.
Now, for the listener who isn't a site reliability engineer, what exactly is the SEV2?
A SEV2, or Severity 2 incident, is a major system failure. It's not, oh, the font on the checkout button is the wrong shade of blue. It's the checkout system is completely broken and we can't process payments. Or user data is actively being corrupted. It means engineers are getting paged at 3 in the morning in a total panic. The report says these incidents are increasing rapidly because you have far fewer human eyes trying to manage these massive, incredibly complex legacy systems using AI coding tools that, let's be honest, hallucinate and break things constantly.
So the AI isn't actually fixing the code. It's just writing buggy code much faster, and there are no humans left to check the work.
That is exactly the risk. The report explicitly recommends shorting companies that are using this AI efficiency narrative too aggressively. It specifically calls out Square or Block, ticker ISHQN. The thesis is that their actual product quality is going to severely degrade. You simply cannot fire 40% of your engineering staff and expect a financial institution to run itself on a chatbot. The tech is just not there yet.
So if the efficiency part is a lie, or at least highly exaggerated, and the hardware trade, just buying NVIDIA is played out.
Right. The report notes NVIDIA's stock has basically flatlined despite blockbuster sales. The market is saturated. Everyone who needs the chips already has them.
Then where is the smart money actually moving?
It goes to the implementation supercycle. The report points to Accenture, ticker ACN.
The consultants. I mean, that seems pretty boring compared to AI chips.
It is incredibly boring.
Yeah.
But it's totally logical. Think about it. All these Fortune 500 companies just spent billions of dollars buying NVIDIA chips and cloud compute. Now their boards of directors are looking at the balance sheets and asking, okay, where's the ROI? What are we actually doing with these things? And the executives don't really know. So they are absolutely desperate. They need someone to come in, wire it all up, integrate it with their legacy data, and actually make it work.
So the alpha moves from the guy selling the shovels to the guy teaching you how to dig the hole.
Or more accurately, the person charging you by the hour to fix the giant hole you just dug for yourself. Accenture is basically the play on fixing the massive mess that the AI hype cycle just created inside corporate America.
I really love that perspective. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From corporate tech warfare to literal candy warfare. Because this story about Hershey's is possibly the most terrifying thing I've read for a legacy brand in a long time.
It really is. It perfectly illustrates the death of the heritage mode.
So let's lay this out. On one side, we have the Hershey Company, absolute American icon. On the other side, we have Mr. Beast, Jimmy Donaldson.
And Brad Reese.
Right, Brad Reese, who is the grandson of the actual founder of Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. This whole thing feels like a tag team wrestling match. What exactly is happening here?
Okay, so Brad Reese releases this scathing open letter. He outright accuses Hershey of quietly replacing real milk chocolate and real cocoa butter with cheaper, highly processed substitutes. He's talking about soy lecithin, PGPR, weird vegetable oils. He's basically saying the product quality is intentionally degrading to save pennies.
Now, if this happened 10 years ago, this is maybe a local news story in Pennsylvania. Hershey puts out a very slick press release saying, we use only the highest quality ingredients and the whole thing goes away in 48 hours.
Correct. But we are living in the triangulated reality now. Mr. Beast picks up this letter. Now, he has over 34 million followers on X, hundreds of millions of subscribers on YouTube. And he doesn't just share the letter, he completely weaponizes it. He uses this family squabble to ruthlessly market his own candy brand, Feastables.
So he's saying, look at these legacy guys. They are feeding you garbage. They are lying to you. Here's my chocolate bar. It only has 5 ingredients. It's real.
Exactly. The report calls it market share warfare, disguised as a human interest story. You have the perceived authenticity of the founder's own flesh and blood, completely amplified and weaponized by the reach of the world's biggest influencer.
And the report views this as a structural headwind for Hershey.
Think about the psychology. Hershey's entire corporate value is built on trust and nostalgia. It's a chocolate I grew up with. It's Americana. If you shatter that trust, if you successfully convince an entire generation of kids that Hershey is actually just selling them cheap chemical slop carrying, you permanently destroy the brand equity. And you absolutely cannot fix that kind of viral damage with a 30-second Super Bowl ad.
It's totally asymmetrical warfare. Hershey has a traditional marketing department, Miss Beast has a digital army.
And that's why the report suggests reducing positions in Hershey. The broader market just doesn't know how to price influencer risk yet. Wall Street analysts still think entirely in terms of supply chains and raw cocoa futures and grocery store shelf space. They don't realize that one guy with a smartphone camera and a massive audience can fundamentally dismantle a 100-year-old reputation in a single week.
Wow. Speaking of dismantling reputations and, well, local politics, we have to talk about Skigate.
Oh man, this is an absolute soap opera.
We are heading to Telluride, Colorado. The story involves a billionaire independent owner named Chuck Horning, an alleged attempted coup, a $127.5 million quote-unquote offer to buy the resort, and a massive fight over water rates.
It literally has everything you'd want in a streaming series.
Right. But why is this taking up space in a high-level market intelligence report? Why do we, or why should you listening, care about small-town municipal politics in Colorado?
Because it is a massive bellwether. The report explicitly calls it a Telluride-specific story that signals a much broader disease. What we are seeing is essentially class warfare breaking out in ultra-luxury destinations.
How so? Walk me through the dynamics.
So as these ski towns become exclusive playgrounds for the ultra-wealthy, the actual local residents, the people who run the chairlifts, pour the coffee, plow the snow, they're getting completely pushed out by the cost of living. And the local municipal governments are finally fighting back. They are using the only leverage they have, municipal water rights, strict zoning laws, and aggressive local taxes to try and seize some control back from these absentee billionaire owners.
So it's a local insurgency against the ultra-rich?
It is. But here is where the report gets really tricky and, frankly, a little contradictory. There is a direct conflict in the source material regarding exactly how you are supposed to trade this information.
I saw that. I highlighted that part. In Section 2 of the report, it says, to short Vail resorts, ticker MTN, because of this exact populist pressure. Basically arguing that if a small-town council in Telluride can hold a billionaire hostage over water, every ski town from Aspen to Jackson Hole is going to do the exact same thing, and corporate margins are going to get absolutely crushed.
Right, so that is the contagion thesis. The populism spreads.
But then I get to Section 4 of the exact same report. And it says to go long on Vail resorts because of a governance premium.
This is the flight to quality thesis. And it's a really interesting debate. The argument here is, look at the absolute mess happening in Telluride. You have local officials resigning in protest, attempted corporate coups, endless lawsuits. It's total chaos. If you are a wealthy skier planning a vacation, or more importantly, an institutional investor, do you really want to deal with that kind of operational risk? Or do you want the boring, predictable corporate stability of a Vail resort?
So the chaos in the independent operator market actually makes the giant corporate monopoly look like a safe haven.
Exactly. The report is presenting two very distinct possible futures. Either the local populism burns the whole industry down, meaning you short Vail, or the populism only manages to burn down the smaller, independent guys who can't defend themselves, leaving Vail as the undisputed last king standing, meaning you go long on Vail.
And what's the final verdict between those two sections? How do they resolve the contradiction?
The expert commentary baked into the report seems to ultimately lean towards the long side. Simply because Vail has a literal army of corporate lawyers to fight these town councils in court for decades. Chuck Horning, as an independent owner, might not have that kind of stamina.
It always comes down to who has the most lawyers, which is actually a completely perfect segue to our next segment, the hidden mechanics of the economy. Because we are going to talk about tariffs.
Ah, yes, the absolute favorite topic of politicians and the waking nightmare of global supply chain managers.
Everyone knows the headline narrative here. Trump's tariff regime. 10%, 20% blanket tariffs on imports. The whole point is supposedly to make foreign goods expensive and bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S.
That is the political narrative, yes.
But the triangulated reality here involves something called the first sale rule. And I have to admit, I had never heard of this loophole before reading this stack.
Most people haven't. It's incredibly obscure. But it saved U.S. importers $45.7 billion in 2025 alone.
Okay, you have to walk me through how this works. Let's say I'm a small business owner. I want to import, let's just say, high-end toasters from China.
Okay, sure. So you find a factory in Shenzhen. They agree to manufacture the toaster for $10 a unit, but you don't actually buy it directly from the factory floor. Usually you buy it through a trading company or a vendor based in Hong Kong or Singapore.
Right, the middleman.
Right. So the factory sells to the middleman for $10. The middleman adds their markup and sells it to you for $15.
Okay, tracking so far.
Normally, under standard customs rules, when that toaster hits the port in Los Angeles, you pay the 20% tariff on the price that you paid, the $15.
Which makes sense, that's my cost.
But under the first sale rule loophole, if you can conclusively prove that the toaster was legally destined for the U.S. market at the exact moment it left the original factory, you are allowed to pay the tariff based on the first sale price, the $10.
Wait, so I pay the tax on the lower price, effectively dodging a massive chunk of the intended tariff.
You save exactly 33% of your tariff tax base in that specific example.
That sounds amazing for margins. Why isn't every single importer doing this?
Because the burden of proof is an absolute logistical nightmare. You need a flawless, unbroken paper trail from the Chinese factory floor all the way to the cargo boat. Purchase orders, internal shipping manifests, raw material invoices, all linking that specific serial number to a U.S. destination before the toaster even existed as a finished product.
And if I'm just a small business guy importing a few pallets of toasters?
You have absolutely zero leverage to make a giant Chinese factory do that level of bespoke paperwork for you. And you certainly don't have the legal team to aggressively argue with U.S. Customs when they inevitably audit you. So you just swallow the cost and pay the full tariff on the $15.
But if I am Walmart?
Oh, if you're Walmart, you have an entire skyscraper full of supply chain compliance officers. You dictate terms. You force the factory to do the paperwork exactly how you want it, or you pull a $100 million contract. You use the rule and you see billions.
So the tariff, which is sold to the public as a way to protect American jobs and level the playing field, actually just heavily cements the dominance of the biggest mega retailers because they are literally the only ones with the resources to exploit the loopholes.
Precisely. The report strongly recommends an overweight position in Walmart, specifically because of this regulatory arbitrage. They basically win whenever the rules get more complicated.
Complexity is a subsidy for the rich.
Well, that's good. That should be on a t-shirt.
I'm copywriting that. Okay, so moving from the shipping ports to the highways, we have another massive conflict in the data here regarding the trucking industry, and this directly connects to the major railroads, companies like Union Pacific and CSX.
Yeah, this is a fascinating real-time battle between two totally different data sets in the report.
On one hand, we constantly hear about the trucker shortage. We desperately need more commercial drivers. But the report says in Section 4 that we should actually short the railroads because the trucker shortage is functionally over. Why are they saying it's over?
Immigrants. The report cites a wave of over 200,000 non-domiciled CDLs rapidly entering the market.
Let me stop you. Non-domiciled CDLs. That means commercial driver's licenses held by drivers who don't live in the U.S. permanently.
Exactly. It is a massive influx of foreign labor willing to drive trucks. Basic supply and demand economics here. The supply of available drivers shoots way up, so the cost of road freight goes way down. And if trucking becomes incredibly cheap, logistics companies stop putting their shipping containers on slow trains. So the play is to short the rails.
And this is why I love this report. Section 2 explicitly says by Union Pacific.
Right, because of what they call Event A, the administrative crackdown. The federal government recently disqualified something like 10,700 of those immigrant drivers because they failed English proficiency tests.
So we basically have a massive flood of immigrant drivers entering the market and a government regulatory dam trying desperately to stop them from working.
And the entire freight market is whipping back and forth wildly based on who is currently winning that political tug of war. If the government expands that English test crackdown, 50,000 cheap drivers could vanish from the roads overnight. Trucking capacity plummets, road freight prices absolutely spike. Suddenly the trains look like a bargain again. The rails win. By UMP.
But if the crackdown is mostly just political theater and the immigrant drivers stay on the road,
then the railroads get totally crushed by cheap, abundant trucking capacity.
So as an investor, how do you even trade a situation that volatile?
You don't watch the shipping volumes. You have to obsessively watch the administrative data. The triangulated reality here is that a completely obscure policy. The enforcement of an English language test is currently the single most important variable in the entire U.S. freight economy. It's not about how many goods consumers are buying. It's entirely about how many people the government is legally allowing to drive the trucks.
It is incredible how fragile that entire balance is. Just one policy shift changes billions of dollars. Okay, let's take a deep breath. We're going to leave the macroeconomic stuff behind and enter the lab. Segment 5, Frontier Science and Biotech.
This is where the source material goes from just being interesting to being genuinely mind-blowing.
And we really have to start with this concept called LADDR, LADDR. Honestly, it sounds like a Silicon Valley dating app, but it's actually a framework for drug discovery.
Right. And the best way to think of LADDR is not as a new physical drug, but as a completely new pair of highly advanced classes.
Okay, explain that.
So biotech giants, companies like Regeneron, they have these massive, sprawling databases of genetic information. They have been collecting patient DNA and clinical trial data for decades. It's all just sitting there on cold servers. LADDR is a new computational software approach that looks at that exact same old data, but it manages to find 95% more genetic links to diseases.
Wait, hold on. 95% more? That's almost double.
It's massive. It's like you've been mining a specific mountain for gold for 20 years, and you threw away all the quote-unquote dirt. Then someone invents a revolutionary new sorting machine that realizes all that dirt was actually packed with platinum. You don't have to go permit and dig a completely new mine. You just reprocess the giant pile of dirt you already own.
So Regeneron suddenly has double or even triple the amount of potential drug targets without having to spend a single dime on running new patient trials.
Exactly. It acts as a massive force multiplier on their existing sunk costs. It turns a static database into an absolute goldmine overnight.
And this isn't just theoretical computer modeling. The report highlights a very specific real-world breakthrough in cancer treatment using these new approaches, specifically lung cancer.
KRAS mutant lung cancer, which historically has been an absolute nightmare for oncologists to treat.
Why is this so hard to beat?
Because the cancer actively evolves. We actually have incredible targeted drugs right now, like sotorasib, that can aggressively kill these specific cancer cells. But the cells are smart. When they're under attack, they undergo a biological process called epithelial mesenchymal transition.
Okay, that is a mouthful, EMT. What does that actually mean for the patient?
Let's use an analogy. Imagine the cancer cell is a bank robber, and the targeted drug is the police. The police have a photo. They know exactly what the robber looks like. But the robber has a highly sophisticated disguise kit. When he sees the cops coming, he can quickly put on a fake mustache, change his suit, alter his walk, and literally stroll right past the police barricade. That is the transition. The cell completely changes its physical shape and its surface proteins to essentially become invisible to the drug.
So the drug works perfectly for a few months, the tumor shrinks, but then the cancer puts on the mustache, transitions, and comes roaring back.
Exactly. It develops resistance. But this new research has finally identified the specific biological disguise kit. It is a protein complex called the MSWISNF complex.
Very catchy name.
I know, scientists are terrible at naming things, but here is the massive breakthrough. They developed a new experimental drug called FHD-286, and its entire job is to essentially confiscate the disguise kit. It acts as an inhibitor for that specific complex.
So it forces the bank robber to stay in his original clothes.
Right. It primes the tumor. You hit the patient with FHD-286 first, which totally locks the cancer cells into their current shape so they can't transition. Then you hit them with the standard targeted drug, and the cancer actually dies because it can't hide anymore.
That is just incredible. And the report notes they are already trying to expand this approach to leukemia as well.
Yes, specifically AML, acute myeloid leukemia. Researchers found that using this exact same inhibitor also exposes a totally different vulnerability in the leukemia cells. It disrupts their cholesterol biosynthesis.
Wait, the blood cancer needs cholesterol, like the stuff in cheeseburgers?
Yep. It desperately needs to synthesize its own cholesterol to build its cell membranes and survive. If you use the inhibitor to block that specific biological pathway, the cancer literally starves to death. It is a completely new paradigm for attacking the disease. You aren't just poisoning the tumor directly with toxic chemo, you are methodically removing its ability to adapt, hide, and feed itself.
It's elegant, but in biology, science isn't always good news. We have to talk about the huge oops moment mentioned in the report regarding the stem cell world, the female iPSC crisis.
Yeah, this is being treated as a very quiet catastrophe right now in the biotech industry.
So let's define terms. iPSC stands for induced pluripotent stem cells. These are basically the matching cells created in a lab that can be coaxed into turning into anything, right? A heart cell, a liver cell, a brain neuron.
Right. And pharmaceutical researchers use millions of these cells in petri dishes to screen new drugs. They basically ask, hey, will this experimental compound fix a diseased heart cell? It saves them from having to test on humans right away.
But there is a fundamental problem specifically with the female cells.
It comes down to basic biology 101. Females have 2 X chromosomes. Males have 1 X and 1 Y. Now, in a healthy female body, you absolutely do not want both X chromosomes screaming genetic instructions at the exact same time. It creates far too much biological noise and protein overload. So the body naturally and permanently turns one of them off. It's a vital process called X chromosome inactivation.
It's like having 2 radios tuned to different stations in the same room, so you just hit the mute button on one of them.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But here's the catastrophic problem they just discovered. When you grow these female stem cells artificially in a lab, in a petri dish over multiple generations, they're actively suffering from X inactivation erosion.
Meaning the mute button is breaking.
The second radio is slowly turning back on. Suddenly, the cell is randomly pumping out double the proteins, double the signals. The cell's internal machinery goes completely haywire.
And if you are a researcher who has spent 5 years testing a multi-million-dollar drug on those specific cells,
You see a weird chemical reaction in the dish, and you write it down and think, the drug is doing something. Or conversely, oh no, the cell is acting sick. But it's not actually the disease you are studying. It's just the cell being completely genetically confused because the mute button broke.
so you end up with massive false positives.
Massive ones. The report heavily implies that huge, very sophisticated companies, we're talking about Biogen, Roche, the giants, they might have spent hundreds of millions of dollars and years of research chasing therapeutic drug targets that literally do not exist in the real world. They were just chasing the artificial noise from the second radio turning on.
That is a staggering quality control nightmare. I mean, it casts serious doubt on years of foundational research.
It really does. It's a brutal reminder to investors that biology is incredibly messy, and sometimes our most advanced lab models are just quietly lying to us.
Speaking of messy biology, let's close out the deep science section with optogenetics. I read this part, and honestly, it sounds like something straight out of Cyberpunk 2077.
It's getting very close to that, yeah. Optogenetics is essentially the study of using targeted flashes of light to control the behavior of living cells.
And researchers use this light technology to finally prove the 2-hit hypothesis for autoimmune diseases, specifically looking at Crohn's disease.
Right. So in immunology, we've always had this lingering question. Why some people who carry the genetic mutation for Crohn's disease get horribly sick, while other people with the exact same mutation go their whole lives and are totally fine?
The genetic mutation is just the first hit.
Yes. Having the gene is just carrying a loaded gun. Doesn't mean it goes off, but what actually pulls the trigger. This recent study used optogenetics, using light to artificially stimulate T cells, which are your immune cells, to perfectly mimic neuronal stress.
Meaning physical signals coming from the nervous system.
Stress. Literal biological stress signal from the brain. And what they comprehensively proved was that when you hit those specific, genetically vulnerable immune cells with that exact neuronal stress signal, boom, the gun goes off. The immune system suddenly activates and aggressively attacks the patient's own gut tissue.
So it's not just a vague, oh, you should eat healthy and do yoga. It proves that your brain's actual stress levels are physically, chemically communicating with your immune system to trigger a devastating chronic disease.
It proves that the whole mind-body connection isn't just new age wellness fluff. It is a hardwired, measurable biological mechanism. And the massive medical implication is if we can identify the specific neurotransmitter or molecule that carries that stress signal to the T cell, maybe we can design a drug to intercept it and block it.
Incredible. Just absolutely incredible. Okay, looking at the time, we have about 10 minutes left. I really want to do a rapid-fire run through the Venture Radar section of the report. These are the highly speculative things that aren't quite mainstream news yet, but are violently flashing red on the intelligence screens.
Do it.
First up on the radar, DeepSeek.
Yes, the huge China story. So the prevailing Western narrative for the last year has been U.S. export sanctions completely killed China's AI ambitions. We cut off their access to advanced NVIDIA chips, so they are permanently dead in the water.
But the emergence of DeepSeek says otherwise.
Very much otherwise. DeepSeek is a Chinese AI lab that is releasing an open-weight model that benchmarks right alongside, and in some cases beats, GPT-4. And the terrifying part for U.S. policymakers is that they did it with significantly older, slower chips, simply by writing vastly superior, more efficient training code. It basically proves that you cannot sanction advanced math. The whole idea of guaranteed U.S. hegemony in AI is completely fractured now.
Wow. Okay, next on the radar, Wave. W-A-Y-V-E.
They are a UK-based autonomous driving startup, but they aren't using the traditional method. They aren't using expensive LiDAR sensors and those spinning buckets you see on the roof of Waymo cars.
The report calls their approach AI-centric.
Right. They are essentially teaching a massive neural net to drive exactly the way a human teenager learns.
Yeah.
Just by watching millions of hours of video. It's end-to-end AI. See a car, don't hit the car, stop at the red shape.
And the big catalyst here is that Nissan just heavily invested in them.
Which is a massive industry validation. If Wave's software-only approach actually scales and works reliably, it is easily 10 times cheaper than the hardware-heavy LiDAR approach. It completely democratizes self-driving cars because you can just put a few cheap cameras on a standard Honda Civic and it drives itself.
Okay, and finally on the radar, a massive blast from the past that honestly gave me a cold sweat reading it. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Oh yeah, the absolute ghosts of the 2008 financial crisis.
The intelligence report explicitly says they are currently being directed by the government to quietly buy up $200 billion more in mortgage securities.
This is what the report labels the déjà vu risk. The political logic is simple. The administration desperately wants lower mortgage rates right now to spur the housing market before the election. The easiest, most opaque way to artificially do that, without the Federal Reserve cutting rates, is to force Fannie and Freddie to become massive buyers of mortgages in the secondary market.
So it's completely artificial government-subsidized demand.
It artificially suppresses the interest rates. It massively helps the big corporate homebuilders sell inventory. But structurally, it is quietly reinflating the exact same toxic, leveraged bubble structure that nearly blew up the entire global economy 20 years ago. We are literally socializing massive tail risk just to buy a few months of short-term economic happiness for voters.
It really feels like we just never, ever learn.
Oh, we learn. We just collectively choose to conveniently forget whenever an election year rolls around.
Yeah, that's fair. So let's try to wrap all of this up into a cohesive takeaway. We have extensively covered manipulated oil markets, the dirty reality of coal powering AI, corporate efficiency lies, influencer candy wars, ski town coups, tariff loopholes, and breaking stem cell biology. When you look at all of that together, what is the synthesis? What is the actual triangulated reality of this moment in time?
For me, the incredibly clear thread running through every single page in this report is that the words efficiency and heritage and even national security are almost always just masks. When a giant like Amazon forcefully talks about AI efficiency, they are masking a desperate financial cleanup of their own terrible zero-interest rate hiring decisions. When the government gives speeches about war and standing strong, they're masking the frantic backroom SPR oil dumps to keep gas prices down for commuters. When a legacy company like Hershey talks about their rich American heritage, they are masking the cold financial reality that they actively cheaped out on the core ingredients to save fractions of a penny.
So the lesson is, it's about forcing yourself to look at the actual mechanism, not the glossy billboard. You don't look at the tariff press release. You look at the first sale customs paperwork. You don't look at the AI keynote presentation. You look at the SEV2 internal engineering incident reports. You don't trust the stem cell results until you check the exon activation error logs.
Exactly that. The actual truth, the actionable alpha, is always buried deep in the plumbing. It is literally never in the corporate press release.
I completely agree. Now, I want to leave the listener with one final, slightly provocative thought that I pulled from the special situations list at the very end of the stack, and it concerns the quote-unquote safe AI narrative.
Oh boy. This is arguably the most financially dangerous narrative operating right now.
Because we constantly see companies, specifically Anthropic and OpenAI, loudly talking about safety. The executives go on tour saying, we need strict government regulation so this super intelligent AI doesn't eventually kill us all. And on the surface, ideally, that sounds like a very responsible, ethical stance.
But when you view it through the deeply cynical lens of Manal Mehta's intelligence report, screaming about safety isn't an ethical stance at all. It is a highly calculated business moat.
Break that down for me. How is safety a moat?
Think about the mechanics. If you successfully convince the federal government that AI is an existential weapon of mass destruction, the government's reflex will naturally be to require massive, incredibly expensive safety certifications and audits to sell AI software, especially if you want to sell to the Pentagon or the CIA.
And who are the only software companies on Earth big enough and heavily capitalized enough to afford armies of compliance lawyers to pass those theoretical certifications?
Exactly. Anthropic, OpenAI, maybe Google. By aggressively lobbying for strict safety regulations, they are effectively pulling the ladder up behind them. They are locking out the agile open source competitors. They're locking out the DeepSeeks. They are starving the university startups. They are using the government's fear to build an impenetrable regulatory wall around their own future monopoly.
And if you look at OpenAI's notoriously weird corporate structure, having a nonprofit board nominally controlling a massive for-profit arm.
It's brilliant in its own way.
Right.
It allows them to largely ignore the traditional stock market pressures. They don't have to scramble to show quarterly profits to retail investors. They can afford to play the decade-long game, quietly cutting massive, lucrative structural deals with the U.S. military and intelligence apparatus, while all their smaller open-source competitors are just desperately worrying about next month's server burn rate.
So the ultimate question for you listening is this. In a global economy entirely driven by head fakes, where nothing is what it seems, is the only truly safe investment the company that actively writes the regulations that govern its own industry?
Are we actually investing in transformative technology anymore, or are we just investing in a company's raw, monopolistic ability to manipulate the rules of the game?
I think after reading this entire report, we both clearly know the answer to that.
Unfortunately, I think we do.
Well, on that highly uplifting and slightly terrifying note, we are going to close the stack for this week. Remember, don't just read the headline on your feed. Look for the obscure loophole. Find the conflicting data point. Always try to triangulate the reality. Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive.
Stay curious, everyone.